In this edition of Sea Changemakers, my colleague Sean Mullen interviews Dr. Amy Cardinal Christianson.
In this edition of Sea Changemakers, we interview Dr. Amy Cardinal Christianson. She is a prominent figure for Canada's fire management systems. Amy specializes in Indigenous wildfire stewardship. She is a Métis woman from Treaty 8 territory, currently living in Treaty 6. She has her master's and PhD in hazard management in fire science and is a social scientist. As a research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service for Natural Resources Canada, she recently co-authored First Nations Wildfire Evacuations, a guide for communities and external agencies with Tara K. McGee and the First Nations Wildfire Partnership. Christensen also co-hosts the Good Fire podcast, which looks at Indigenous fire use around the world. Amy, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here.
So much of your time seems to be taken up with projects related to hazard and fire management. Could you tell us what inspired your journey into this field?
Yeah, I grew up in northern Alberta. So I think there, fires were more of a part of life than, in many urban centers. And I always kind of had family who were involved in fire. And in 1998, I'm trying to remember the year, the Virginia Hills fire actually came close to my community where I was living. And, it was kind of like what we see now where the sky turns black and there's ash falling everywhere. And yeah, it was a pretty big experience for me. And I think I've always just been really interested in hazards, and I've done everything like with volcanoes and tsunamis and other things, but I've always kind of, I guess, felt more bound to the forest. And so that's kind of why I kind of ended up coming back to wildfire, even though I was trying not to be 100% honest, to get something different. But so I've been at my job at the Canadian Forest Service now for 10 years.
And so your podcast is called Good Fire. Those are not two words that we often see joined together. What is a good fire?
Yeah, so for many Indigenous peoples across Canada, we kind of have this a different thinking about fire, I think, than other folks. So what we see as good fire is, fire that's important on the landscape. So many Indigenous people believe that fire is basically a gift to us, and it can basically help us to steward the environment for ourselves and for our relations, for the animals and the plants. And so fire, when it's used in the right conditions with the right techniques at the right time, can really benefit the forest, can benefit humans, can benefit, like I said, animals and other things. So what we're seeing right now, obviously in BC especially, are the bad fires. So these are the large fires that, are destructive, that hurt and kill people, communities, damage the ecosystems, kill wildlife. And so those are the type of fires that when we're using good fire, that helps us to avoid those big bad fire events.
So you mentioned the benefits of a good fire for the ecosystem and for the animals. What are those benefits?
Yeah, so I'll just maybe give some examples from where I'm from, which is northern Alberta. So Henry Lewis was a researcher who in the 1970s went up and worked with the Woodlands Cree and Dene people, looking at, how they used fire in their territories. And what he often found was that there were so many different reasons for burning, and it really depends on like the cultural objectives that a certain nation is trying to achieve. But one of the most common ones is basically burning off dead grass. And so when you burn, like, when grass dies and you don't do anything with it, it basically just kind of compounds, and it can be a real fire hazard, and you don't get those nice green grass shoots coming up. So when we go in and we burn off meadows and other things, it keeps the aspen and poplar and other trees from kind of growing into the meadow and taking it over. It keeps the meadow open. It eliminates kind of that dead grass. And and we get lots of nice, healthy green shoots, which attract deer, moose, and other animals to the area. And I think too, like in the north, another thing that I found really cool from Dr. Lewis's work is that he interviewed some elders who actually used fire to extend the growing season. So in the north, we have frost in the ground for a long time, especially in the spring. And when you turn when you burn, you basically turn things black, right? And that black ground then absorbs the heat of the sun into the soil and melts that frost out. So you get green grass growing up sooner. There's lots of reasons too, like berries is the other one. So I think that's the most common one, where people would burn to improve berry patches and berry yield. And yeah, I think that's really, I've seen that across Canada in many different nations, where they go and, you see a berry tree that's maybe, overgrown. There's just kind of little berries on it that aren't healthy. So they would go through and burn those patches with this low intensity fire in either the early spring or late fall, and come back a few years later, and you'd really have healthy, resilient berry bushes that had grown back.
And so this is what you mean by the cultural aspect of good fires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good fires, the primary objective of good fire is to achieve a cultural objective. So basically, so that your community, your nation can continue to carry out your cultural practices on the land. And a secondary benefit is reducing the fuel load. So a lot of times when we see prescribed burning or other things that agencies are doing right now, what they're trying to do, is reduce fuel load. And luckily with good fire, we get at that, naturally as well. But it's definitely not like the first thing that you think of when you're trying to set a good fire is, oh, I'm going to reduce fuel. You're more thinking about, like I said, the cultural benefits that you can get from conducting that burn.
I thought was great, important, because I really don't think people know what that means, good fire, and then how the landscape has changed and so forth. So
yeah, we have this, I don't know, like if you guys have a webpage, but we have this book.
Yeah.
So it's, Blazing the Trail, Celebrating Indigenous Fire Stewardship. It's a product of Fire Smart Canada, so you can find it on their webpage. But it was written by a bunch of different Indigenous authors, and it basically, like, they have a foreword that's written by different fire keepers, and then it really gets into like good fire and then goes into specific examples of how communities are using good fire at the moment. So this one talks about like fire as medicine.
Okay.
And it's all Indigenous artists that we commission throughout the books.
Blazing the Trail is a book that's been produced by a number of different authors. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So Blazing the Trail is a Fire Smart Canada product. So Fire Smart Canada is kind of our national mitigation program in Canada for reducing fire risk. And so what we did with that was we brought together a bunch of different Indigenous co-authors, Indigenous peer reviewers, Indigenous artists, Indigenous graphic designers to produce a book basically talking about Indigenous fire stewardship. And originally the idea was that it would be for Indigenous communities, that wanted to basically put good fire back into their lands. But what it really has almost become is an educational resource almost for people who want to learn about good fire and what it means. And so the book is basically introduces the concept of good fire, and then it goes into stories of 11 different communities and what they're doing on their territories to reduce their fire risk. So yeah, it's a really neat book. There's a foreword in there by two fire keepers from British Columbia. So Harry Spahan and Joe Gilchrist, where they talk about the importance of fire to the landscape, and fire, as medicine for the land, is basically a tool to heal. So it's about 48 pages, I think. It's $10 on the Fire Smart Canada webpage, if anyone's interested.
And what advice would you give to upcoming or young people, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, who are seeking a career in fire management, which seems like an increasingly important role in our country and our communities?
Yeah, well, I would say that we definitely need more Indigenous people in fire in Canada. It's a very small community right now of folks, and in the different nations, there's a lot of different people that burn or use fire, but in terms of like the overall fire management and agencies in Canada, the representation is pretty low for Indigenous peoples, and especially as we move into upper senior management. So the decision makers, basically very, very fewer Indigenous. And so for me, like any young people that would I would totally encourage them to consider a career in fire. And it's not like, you don't just have to go into one thing like fire science, to come. There's like social scientists that work in this area. We have GIS technicians. We have, economists. There's all sorts of people, modelers. I'm trying to think of all the different people that we work with in our lab, but we work with like computer science technicians. It's a really diverse group in fire and in forest management now. It's not kind of the same where you had to be a registered professional forester or something. So yeah, I would say, that if you're interested, to definitely, unfortunately right now, the agencies still require, that education. So university degrees or college diplomas, other things to be able to obtain positions. We're trying to kind of change that, hopefully, to be able to substitute experience. So for example, you might have a firefighter who's been on the fire line for 30 years but doesn't have his high school, and unfortunately he can't get employed in a permanent role with an agency. So I would definitely encourage going to school and keeping going. And any Indigenous students that want to do it can reach out to me, or there's a few other Indigenous people as well that would be great to mentor people moving forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
Please tune in to our extended interview with Dr. Amy Cardinal Christianson on SoundCloud.